What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Amateur Hour TV for another video on the second channel for Amateur Hour. On this channel, I like to go through additional NBA-related topics, especially concerning the Toronto Raptors, that I just do not have enough time to go through on my main channel, Amateur Hour Sports, with over 11,000 subscribers. So we do so here instead on Amateur Hour TV, where the vibes are a little bit different, a little bit less formal, a little bit more personal approach, but you still get that Raptors content. So if you like what you see from today's video, be sure to drop a like and consider subscribing for more content like this in the future, and you can help us on the road to 2,000 subscribers. But today's video is all about the NBA Power Rankings, and to my surprise, the Raptors have been ranked pretty adequately here. Typically, the Raptors get seated in these power rankings. You're kind of like, well, I mean, did they even do any research before doing this? Did they even look at the Raptors team, the Raptors roster, before actually making this list? But in this case, I mean, I have the top five that I'm about to show you, and the top five is the top five that I would exactly have done. And this is strange to see from NBA.com, which is where this list comes from. They have the Boston Celtics first, and the Bucks, the Sixers, the Heat, and then the Raptors in fifth. That is exactly where I would have had the Raptors. And I mean, it's so shocking to me to see the Raptors actually ranked where I believe they should be ranked. Typically, I mean, I wouldn't say I act shocked when like they're seated way lower than I would have expected, but I'm like, it's not that surprising when the Raptors are underrated. It's something that kind of consistently happens year after year. But in this case, fifth, that makes a ton of sense. I mean, the balance of powers in the Eastern Conference, the top two is pretty standard. I think you should have Boston and Milwaukee as your top two in the East going into the season. If you don't, then I'm confused. Then you probably have Sixers at three. I kind of struggle to see anybody being above the Sixers there. The Sixers obviously still have Joel Embiid. James Harden, it's not what it used to be, but it's still James Harden. Maxey kind of ascending. They had a good offseason. I really, really like the pickup of PJ Tucker. I think people are really overrating the pickups of Melton and House, but solid pickups nonetheless. And I think third seed is a pretty fair spot for them. And then, I think there's a little bit of debate between Miami and Toronto being fourth and fifth, but ultimately, in my opinion, Miami they got worse from last season. They were the one seed last year. I think they overperformed to get that one seed. They weren't the best team in the Eastern Conference, and I'm a little bit shocked they were a Jimmy Butler bad decision away from getting to the NBA Finals. Obviously, without him, they don't get in that position at all, but still, that three-pointer still confused me to this day. Regardless, they got worse. I didn't think they were a one seed anyway. I think that they're fourth or fifth seed, but they just always find a way to win. Like Spoelstra, Butler, like these guys, they just always find ways to win. Kyle Lowry, I expect him to be a lot better this season. Again, that team just wins. So I think, giving them the one seed respect, giving them the market respect, fourth place is a little bit fine there. And then going back to, you had the Raptors in fifth place, which I think is pretty fair for the Raptors. That's not to say that the Raptors can't, go above that, finish above the Miami Heat. Miami could have an off year. Like I said, I didn't think they were one seed last year. They got worse by losing PJ Tucker and not replacing him. There's not really a power forward on that roster that you really are comfortable with starting. So the Raptors can certainly leapfrog that team and get up into the top four seeds in the Eastern Conference. Last year, the Raptors, we've said so many times, they won 48 games in a transition season. People thought that they would be rebuilding going into the season we just had. And we all of a sudden won 48 games. And we finished the season as one of the best teams in the NBA. Like from January onwards, we were one of the best teams in the NBA by record. So can the Raptors sustain that sort of success over the course of an entire season? We'll have to see. But if they are able to do that, this team can win 50 games. And if they win 50 games, they can be a top four seed in the Eastern Conference. Now, there are some certain teams that are not listed on this list, obviously, because they're not top five ranked. Notable ones, I would say, are the Brooklyn Nets, because there's still a lot of uncertainty there, because if Kevin Durant does end up going back, and I mean, I still can't believe there's no traction on any sort of trades. Like, what are the Brooklyn Nets doing? They have to get rid of this guy. He actually said yes. I mean, I think this is a BS report, but there was reports that suggested Kevin Durant would rather retire than play for Brooklyn again. I don't see that, but why are they still clinging on? I mean, it's Kevin Durant, but it looks like the situation is beyond repair, and Joe Tsai, the Brooklyn Nets owner, subtweeting Kevin Durant would certainly indicate to me that that saga is kind of over and Kevin Durant won't be returning to that team. But if somehow he does, they still have Kyrie Irving and he actually plays more than like 30 games. They have Ben Simmons, who is still a good player. We love to clown him. That's a good player. TJ Warren, I'm like slept on signing there. I mean, I know he's been out for a while, but I know there was the bubble where he was spectacular. But, beyond that, even before the bubble, he was still a good player. Royce O'Neal's a great pickup, and there's a whole plethora of decent players as well there. I mean, Seth Curry, still there. Joe Harris, still there. It's a good team. That team, if everybody is there, unfortunately, I'd probably have to bump the Raptors to 6 and move the Brooklyn Nets somewhere up in probably the 3-4 range. I think that's completely fair to say. Some people may even have them higher, but the dysfunction within that team right now, you leave them out of the top 5. Another maybe notable is the Atlanta Hawks, because the Atlanta Hawks, they made that big pick of DeJounte Murray. I don't want to kind of go off looking like a clown here, but I think a lot of people are definitely overrating the Atlanta Hawks. Their win total for this season has been set right around 47 wins. I can't really see them winning 47 games. I actually have money on the Atlanta Hawks not getting to that 47 win mark. So I think that people are overrating them a little bit. I still think they are a playoff team, but that could be a playoff team that comes through the play-in tournament to make the playoffs. I think the Raptors are going to be above that. I think the Raptors are going to be a top 6 seed. Atlanta, maybe we'll have to bank on Brooklyn being dysfunctional and not being in that position, but there are certainly some other good teams there. But in terms of like challenging for a top 5 spot, I can't really see anybody doing that other than Brooklyn, other than Atlanta, who maybe could sneak up above that 47 win mark. I just personally don't really see that happening. Other teams you may want to discuss, I mean, Chicago. I'm not a fan of that Chicago Bulls team. I know they were really hot to start the season and maybe injuries derailed that a little bit. But for the Chicago Bulls to be anywhere close to what they were at the start of last season, DeRozan has to operate like the best player in the NBA again, or at least a top 3, top 5 guy in the NBA, the way he was playing, MVP caliber. I can't really see that happening. Zach LaVine and DeRozan, for that matter, would have to take huge leaps defensively. Something, again, I just don't really see happening. Vucevic, to be honest, it would just have to evaporate from existence, and that contract would just have to not exist. Defensively, he's just a disaster. Offensively, he's not doing enough to make up for that fact. Pat Williams would probably have to take huge strides like a lot would have to happen for me to say Chicago would be up in the top 5 seeds, in my opinion. The Cleveland Cavaliers, I think there's a little bit of overachieving with that team this season, but it is a young team, so maybe they can ascend a little bit further. But again, that's just not somebody I see finishing in the top 5. And as a result, the NBA.com has put the Raptors in 5th on their list here. So as it comes to the Raptors, I really, really like the team that we have this year. The starting 5 is likely going to be Fred VanVleet, Gary Trent Jr., Scotty Barnes, OG Anunoby, and Pascal Siakam. There's going to be some question marks if the team is best suited to have Gary Trent Jr. coming off the bench, President Chua starting, Gary Trent in that 6-man role, that scoring role. I think that makes sense in a lot of ways positionally, but from like a personal standpoint, in terms of like the individuals that you have to convey those messages to, it could be a little bit of a problem, but that's something to consider. That's something I actually covered in the most recent Amateur Sports video, so go check that out as well for my full thoughts on that. But nonetheless, great first 6 in the rotation, whichever way you kind of lay it out. Then you go to the bench beyond possibly Achua. You've got Otto Porter Jr., good defender, good lengthy defender, and a good offensive player who can space the floor. Like, he's a solid player. Great pickup by the Raptors in the offseason. You've still got Chris Boucher. You've still got Thaddeus Young. Maybe you can get something out of one of your backup point guards. That's a great top 9, possibly top 10 if like Flynn actually learns how to play NBA basketball, or if Delano Banton learns how to control his body and, more importantly, control a basketball without turning it over. If either of those two things happen, like, that's an excellent top 10. But at this point, even if we don't have to use a point guard and we just kind of use Siakam or Barnes as the point guard when Fred's off the floor, that's a great top 9. And what the Raptors have done a brilliant job of doing over the last decade, other than maybe the Tampa season, is combat injuries. When a guy gets injured, somebody just steps up, somebody fills in, and we just don't really think about that. Like, obviously, there's our record maybe reflects a little bit differently when guys are out, but overall, I'd say that when guys get injured, like this team really does a great job of trying not to miss a beat and covering for that guy. We really compensate for these injuries. And I think we're one of the best teams at thriving. Maybe thriving is not quite the correct word, but we do an excellent job of just continuing to play great basketball despite and in spite of those injuries. And I think that's something that can continue the season. And I think that's something that can really help your regular season record, which is what we are discussing here. Overall, in terms of that record, I think the Raptors, 5th in the power ranking, makes sense. I think they are looking like a pretty good 5th seed here. But if they string some wins, some really good win streaks together, some big performances against some of the bigger teams here, like they were very close this season to even moving up into like a 2 seed. If they could beat the damn Detroit Pistons, which hopefully they can do this season. But this is a team that can absolutely move up into a 3 or 4 seed. It's something that wouldn't necessarily surprise me that much, but overall, I think their talent does equate to what is likely going to be the 5th seed for in the NBA this season. So that wraps it up for me for today on Amateur TV. If you did enjoy, be sure to drop a like to support the channel that little bit further, and make sure you are subscribed for more NBA content with a focus on the Toronto Raptors in the future. Also, be sure to check out my main channel, Amateur Sports, with over 11,000 subscribers. That channel is a lot more professional, a lot less personable, different vibes, different Raptors content, different styles. I'm just trying to keep you guys entertained, and I'm just trying to get all of my thoughts out there about the NBA and all that stuff. I'm glad there's people like you watching who do enjoy it. We'll see you again next time for another video on Amateur TV.